Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a Portuguese wine. This is a wine from the Bairrada DOC. It's from a producer called Luis Pato, and this is his Vinhas Velhas. It's the 2020 vintage of this, and it's made from a grape variety there called Baga, which is the classic grape variety used, often unblended, in making Bairrada. Luis Pato has been a huge influence on the Bairrada area and on the Baga grape variety. He started making wine in Bairrada in 1980, and he's had a huge part in moving the reputation of the region from being one that produced quite uncompromising, quite rustic styles of red to a much more sort of elegant, age-worthy, fine wine producing area. And this wine actually really nicely illustrates the winemaking techniques that he's used to make those changes. Today, Luis has 60 hectares of vines across 9 vineyards. Bairrada region stretches from Coimbra in the southeast really, just a little short of Porto to the northwest end of the region. It lies slightly inland, and it is between the Atlantic Ocean and the Dow, its sister DO, within the broader area of Bairras. Unsurprisingly, the region is heavily influenced by the Atlantic Ocean, and that has a huge impact on the climate. It means that there's a lot of humidity in the region, which can sometimes be a problem in terms of creating disease pressure during harvest. The changes that Pato has made to his winemaking over the years did, in fact, in 1999 lead him to take most of his wines out of the DOC and just to list them as a regional wine from Bairras. This wine was produced in that way, but I now notice that it has the labelling Bairrada DOC on it. So clearly something has changed, and that's allowed Luis to return to the DOC fold for this wine at least. Vinhas Velhas, old vines, and this was probably the first time that Portuguese wines were marketed as old vines. This comes from a plot of 50-year-old vines planted on chalky-clay soil, which can be quite good for this area, as during the summer it provides a water reservoir for the vines so that if it's very dry they don't stop functioning. The fruit for this wine is hand-picked, and this is the first one of Luis's innovations. Not that he hand-picks, but the fact that at the end of August he'll pick about 2/3 of the crop off these vineyards and use that to make sparkling base wine. So the grapes are being picked at relatively low ripeness. They're being pressed without maceration, and therefore he's taking a clear juice for base wine for his sparkling wine. And that enables the remaining third of the harvest to stay on the vines and to gain additional ripeness for that last month before they're picked at the end of September. It's quite common practice, but when Luis started out, the idea of de-stemming the grapes, as happens with this wine, was not a widespread practice. So that reduces some of the tannic astringency that you might get from stalks being included in the ferment. Fermentation goes on in temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks, and at the end of fermentation, the wine is put into 650-litre French oak casks for a year's further aging. The oak is old oak, so therefore it's not giving oak flavours, it's simply being used to allow gentle oxidation to help fix aromas and to polymerise the tannins and to make sure the tannins are stable and stay in the wine. People liken the Baga grape variety to Nebbiolo, the Piedmontese grape variety, in terms of that it has high acidity, not particularly high colour, and plentiful tannins. And this is a wine, even the way Luis Pato makes it to try and moderate its harshness and astringency, this is still a very structured wine. And the winery believe it has the ability to age for up to 15 years. So if so, this is a great value wine with the ability to age well. Looking at the colour, we have a dark ruby red, but it's not particularly deep. As I say, Baga tends not to have deep colour. I can see the stem of the glass very clearly through that. But actually the colour is a sort of an almost black ruby note. Swirling it, the wine is not particularly forming tears. It's a 12.5% alcohol wine, as noted on the label there, so I wouldn't expect it to have enormous viscosity. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? Smelling that smells very traditional, very drying. I say the wine is de-stemmed, but it almost sort of smells of wood possibly coming from the pips of the grapes, possibly coming from the oak, but there's a real savoury dustiness to the aromas. Behind that savoury note, there is a little bit of red fruit. It seems to have a sort of a slightly sharp, lower ripeness, sort of red plum sort of note, where the plum is very sort of fresh and lifted, but doesn't quite have the depth and concentration that a flavour that it gains as it gets more and more ripe. So let's taste. On the palate, there's a very definite bite of acidity to begin with. The wine's a midweight, it's got some fine tannins, and again there's that sort of slightly lower ripeness, sort of sharp red plum note comes through. There's a slight almost leafiness to it. It's a very pretty fruit, it's lifted very nicely by the acidity. The alcohol is not intruding on the mid palate. The structure is very, very fine. There are tannins there. They're giving a bitter, drying note that's interacting with the acidity to give a mouth-watering palate. But looking very carefully, actually, in the midst of the tannins and the sharp red fruit, there's actually some lovely lifted perfume notes. There's some slightly floral notes. There's slightly soft red fruit, sort of almost strawberry notes. And then there's a bit of concentration as well. It's sort of an almost boysenberry to sort of licorice warmth, just peeking out in the middle of the mid palate. It fades again, and actually at the finish, the tannins are sort of coming back in. There's a sort of a graphite note. The tannins aren't drying and astringent, and I mean, Bairrada 20 years ago would really have puckered your mouth. Your tongue would have been sticking to the roof of your mouth. This has structure, it has grip, but it also has sufficient fruit that it stops it from being too astringent and harsh. And that red fruit is there on the end of the back palate, and the finish has this sort of fresh, clean, red plummy note. So I think the wine, clearly with its acidity and its structure, has the ability to age. I think the concentrated dark fruit that I was just sort of was peeking out at the core of the wine, I think that will fill out with age, and you'll see a lot more of that. The acidity will keep the wine stable. Those fine tannins will become smoother and become silky. I see no reason to suggest that this wine wouldn't last for 15 years. I think it's the sort of thing that would be great fun to try, to buy a few bottles and open it through the course of its aging and see how it developed. Because at the end of the palate, I'm just getting sort of tiny wafts of sort of dark licorice concentration, and I think as the wine ages, those flavours will start to open up and you will get a lot more of that. So yes, a really interesting wine. I think a nice selected harvesting, reducing the weight of fruit being picked, destemming the fruit and aging in French oak has made this an attractive modern wine without completely stealing its identity as a Bairrada or as a wine made from Baga. There is still that grip, a drying note there, but it's surrounded by lovely fruit that I think has the potential to open beautifully as the wine ages. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope you found this an interesting tasting. If you have, do please leave your comments, do please like and share. We'd love to hear from you and get your feedback. If you'd like to, do please sign up and follow us on YouTube. That would be fantastic. And then that way, hopefully, we'll see you again for another tasting in the really near future. Thanks again. Bye for now.